This is Join Us in France, episode 346. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we look around France so you can best enjoy France as a destination. We talk about French culture, history, gastronomy, and everything it takes to have a wonderful experience in France. Today, Elyse, Rivin, and I share our list of tips on how to handle Paris when you have mobility issues. When we recorded this, Elyse and I had just returned from Paris, and she's scheduled for hip surgery, so she knows what it's like on a personal level. She did not let that stop her, but she can tell you about all the limits and how to overcome them. In the show notes, I'll share a link to the metro and bus services that are accessible from the RATP, la RATP, and this page is even in English. So look to the show notes for that. After my chat with Elyse, I'll also update you on what exactly you're going to need to prove that you've been vaccinated, because you've probably heard about new rules in France taking effect on the 1st of August. I will explain. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, my voice map self-guided Paris tours, and my services such as my itinerary review, where I can help you craft the best vacation in France specifically for you, custom for you. I put the sales page for the custom itinerary service on pause while I was enjoying some time at the beach, but I'll turn it back on in a few days on July 21st. The best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. And you can also follow the podcast on Instagram by searching for Addicted to France. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
Today we're going to talk about something that's really important. And I know not a lot of people think about it, but they really should. We want to discuss strategies for older visitors in Paris.
Yes.
Strategies for coping with a big city like Paris. But you know what? It also works for anybody who's coming with children, because I never met a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old who loved walking for days on end.
No.
They all want to be carried, you know.
No.
And this is also important for anybody of any age who has limited mobility or health issues that forces them to take those things into account.
Exactly.
And I think these are strategies that will make anybody's visit better if you think about it, because you know, you're in Paris to have a good time and not to be completely exhausted at the end of the day and have a frowny face.
Yes.
You know, that's the idea. Anyway, so I asked the Facebook group and they came up with a few strategies. And Elyse and I have just been to Paris recently. And so we have some things that we know are also good strategies for visitors who want to limit how much walking they do or how much,
Good strategies or things to avoid having learned the lesson.
Right. So we'll go down the list in no particular order. It's, as always, it's a bit of a free-for-all here. So this is just a conversation. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
Number one is take the bus rather than the metro. The Paris buses are very well done. They are kneeling buses. And so even if you show up with a wheelchair, they will kneel for you and make it fairly easy and straightforward for you to come in. It's the same with
A poussette.
kid strollers.
Strollers.
Okay,
Strollers,
they can do all of that. Even the metro stops that have elevators or escalators, they can be out of order. You're not sure where the elevator is anyway. It's just good practice. If you're in Paris and you have any sort of mobility issue, take the bus.
The only caveat I would say to that, and I know this from experience, is that you need to leave yourself much more time if you take the bus.
Right. The reason why Parisians don't like the bus is
because it's slow.
Because it's slow. It's much slower than the metro, which is the reality. If you're going to work, you don't want to be in the bus. I understand that, but you people listening to me today, you're not in Paris for work.
Right.
It's fine if there's a bit of a traffic jam.
You need to leave time. I once, a number of years ago, was with somebody I was going to be actually preparing a tour with, and we took the bus from, I'm not sure where we started, but it was somewhere along the Seine up into Montmartre. But I don't remember which number bus it was, because there are very good maps that give you all of the circuits of all the buses. But it was rush hour, and I cannot tell you how long it took.
Right.
So you need to be aware of things like that.
Right. There are two neighborhoods in Paris that have terrible bus service, Montmartre and Le Marais. There are very few lines that go up there, and even when they do, it's not easy. In Le Marais, they actually have shorter buses that can navigate those tiny
narrow streets.
But there are very few streets in Le Marais where they have a bus.
Now, one of the things that is good to know, and this is really connected to the idea of the metro, there are a couple of lines that have improved their service, and the stops are not even that far apart, which means that you don't have to worry about whether you get out here and how far you have to walk. The number one line, the one that goes east-west, is probably the best example of that. You know, it's a line where, generally speaking, you don't have to go very far to get someplace once you get out. But some of the other metro lines are very complicated, and it's very important to have a very good metro map and to have a bus map. Sometimes you can get them both at the same time.
Okay. Now I'm going to interject here, Elyse. Don't use maps.
Why?
Use apps.
Yeah.
Apps tell you everything you need to know.
In terms of distance.
If you install City Mapper and load the Paris data, it will show you where all the bus stops are. It will tell you how much you have to walk to that bus stop.
Okay.
It will, if you happen to take the metro, it will tell you where on the metro,
the exits are,
which car you should get in to minimize walking. It will tell you how much you have to walk within the station to get to your transfer, if you're transferring lines. Anyway, City Mapper is magical. You need to learn to use that. And I know people like Elyse, you're so used to the paper maps and whatever. That's your natural thing. Paper maps cannot work out these distances for you. They don't tell you anything about that. And of course, if you've lived in Paris a long time and if you always take the same lines, you know where in the metro in which car you should be in. But if it's your first time, there's no way you know this.
No,
unless you have the app, and then because the app will tell you.
And it's true, because you can get in one side of the station and the exit is on the other side.
Right. And there are some metro stations in Paris that are hellish. Châtelet-Les Halles, any of the big train stations. So Montparnasse, Montmartre, sorry.
Lines crisscrossing.
Yeah, so many lines crisscrossing. You say, oh, it's just, I just go to Gare du Nord and change trains.
Right.
Yeah, maybe it's a mile before you can get into the next train, okay? Exactly. And not just a mile, but several sets of stairs as well. And in the Paris Metro is old. They have not made an effort to modernize it. There are lots of stations which are not accessible to wheelchair users.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
That would be most metro stations in Paris are not accessible.
Right.
They don't have an elevator. And so, and even when they do have an elevator, you show up and it's out of order. And guess what? You have 200 steps. That would be abyss. That's happened to me so many times. But they've changed they've changed the
elevator.
The elevator. Now apparently it doesn't happen so much. Yeah, I'm
I
not
once
sure.
had to walk up and down that one. That's hell.
Yeah, it's a lot. So just use the City Mapper app. Another thing that's really important is that you set up the Uber app. Again, somebody like Elyse, you don't have Uber on your phone.
No.
Lots of people don't have Uber on their phone. If you're in Paris, and you have any sort of mobility issues, it will save your skin because Uber can be extremely cheap, especially if you're just in the middle of the day and you just need to get somewhere. You don't have to call the Uber before you have the price. It will tell you the price. You can just open your app, set it up with your credit card and everything. Then wherever you're standing, the trick is do not move. You go to the place where you want to pick up the Uber. Make sure cars can go there, okay? Don't be in the middle of the park.
Right.
So be on, on the sidewalk. You pick a good spot in the shade, whatever it is that you would like. And you make your request for an Uber right there. It'll tell you the price before you get in. And that's always the price you are charged.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing is with Uber, you need to know the address of where you're going.
Like what happened to us with Malmaison.
Yeah, Malmaison. I just said Malmaison, and the guy took us to the city center of Malmaison, which is not where we want to go. So I had to add another €5 or whatever. It's not that big of a deal, but I should have, I knew this. I should have remembered to just tell it exactly where you want to go. So do that. Another thing is...
Let me just add, too, that, it depends on where you're coming from, but you also need to know that there are specific hours when the metro stops and the buses stop. And that's probably a very good reason to have the Uber because certain bus lines don't stop late. They stop early.
Yeah.
And the metro stops at around midnight, I think, pretty much everywhere.
Midnight,
So that's good to know in advance.
Yeah. You should plan your trip with distances in mind. You need to spend the whole day in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay? You choose, today I'm going to be in Le Marais, and you spend your day in Le Marais.
Right.
Today I'm going to be in Montmartre. You spend the whole day in Montmartre. Do not underestimate how long it will take you to go from Le Marais to the Latin Quarter.
Right.
It's not that far, but it's a lot of hoofing.
Yep.
Okay? And if you're trying to minimize that, don't do it.
And you can take the 96. That one I know.
Right. So some of them you know by heart.
I know by
because
heart.
You've done it so many times. But people have a tendency to just think, oh, now I feel like doing something else. Oh, now I want to go to the Parc Monceau.
Right, exactly.
Well, depending on where you are, this might just be the wrong thing to do.
It's much more logical and efficient to stay in the same neighborhood.
Right. So plan your days around a neighborhood. Of course, you should stay as fit as you can at home, walk, take the stairs, do all of that sort of thing. But for some of us, even if we do all that, it gets to the point where we can't walk all that much,
And it is city walking. This is something that I know from when I used to do a lot of tours in the city. I cannot emphasize enough. This is sidewalk city walking. And it doesn't matter how much you like to walk in the countryside. It's not the same thing.
Right. And also, like, for instance, you go visit Les Invalides. To get between the front entrance to the museums, you're going to be walking... a quarter mile on cobblestone?
On cobblestones.
Okay. If you go to Montmartre, you will be on cobblestones pretty much the whole time.
That's right.
You need to plan time for coffee breaks and potty breaks. One of the things that happens with older people and with people with disabilities is that they need more bathroom breaks.
That's right.
Than when they were younger. Okay. This is just a fact of life. Plan them. Just plan 15 minutes in the middle of whatever you're doing. So if you want 2 hours for the museum, plus 15 minutes, plus another 15 minutes to get to the bus stop or whatever.
All museums will have bathrooms.
Right.
That is not a problem.
Right. Use them in the museum.
Use them in the museums if you are in a museum, because it is not always evident where you can go to a bathroom out on the streets. Now, some people find it perfectly okay to use the portable toilets.
The Sanisette.
The Sanisette. I'm sure that they're okay. I really don't like them very much.
Yeah, and I don't mind them at all.
And she doesn't mind them at all.
Yeah.
So, and otherwise, you have to go into a cafe. And some cafes in Paris accept that and some do not. You have to have a drink if you want to use the toilets. And you need to know that. You just need to know that. And so it's not always easy to know where you're going to go to the bathroom once you leave a building.
Right. So go when you can.
Go when you can.
Another thing is, do not stay in Montmartre. If you have any sort of mobility issue, forget about Montmartre. There's stairs everywhere. There's cobblestone everywhere.
And it's steep.
It's quite steep. Okay? Don't go. Don't go there with strollers. Don't go there with young kids. I know you've read all these blog posts about how in Montmartre there's butterflies and, fairies flying around.
There are?
No.
Oh. Oh.
But reading some of these blog posts, you'd think there might be some like that going on. No. It's just very hilly, lots of cobblestone.
And this is a place where take a cab, take a Uber. I mean, go there that way, come back that way. Don't even think about it.
So one thing that I like to recommend is that people go up with an Uber and then they walk down Rue des Martyrs all the way to the Opera House. Okay. But you're walking down. It's much easier.
It's much easier.
But there are some people walking down is not any easier.
It's not any easier. Yeah? And it is still a good section of it is on cobblestones.
Oh, most of it is. So, no matter where you go in Paris, there will be stairs. In museums, there will be stairs. Paris museums are not designed to be convenient with an elevator for everybody, okay? They have elevators, a lot of them do now, but they reserve the elevators for people in wheelchairs.
Not Orsay and not the Louvre. Those are good. They're good. Anybody can use the elevator. Yeah. And there are lots of them.
Yeah.
And the Orsay...
But you have to find them.
Yeah, well, yes, but they are really not. There are enough. I mean, it's actually amazing to see how they've managed to do that in the Louvre, which of course should never have. And it wasn't designed 5 years ago. And the Orsay also has escalators on both sides,
right?
So you don't have to worry about it. I mean, there are a few smaller museums are much more complicated because they usually only have one elevator and one, if they have it. And a perfect example is the Picasso Museum. There aren't escalators. There's an elevator or stairs.
Right.
So, you just need to know. But you can always ask when you go in.
Right. And if you need a wheelchair, just get a wheelchair, okay? Yeah. You can rent a wheelchair in Paris very easily. It will make visiting the museums much easier. Wheelchairs, you go into a pharmacy, any pharmacy, they are everywhere in Paris. Every street, I swear, has two of them. And you just say, I need to rent a wheelchair.
The other thing to know is that most of the museums that I am familiar with, you can reserve one.
That's true.
This is, all of the museums that have either are recent or have been renovated, they all have that as an option. You just have to reserve it ahead of time.
Right. Because they know that museum users sometimes are older or whatever, they need wheelchairs.
And let me add, because I think it's really important, if you really don't want to deal with a wheelchair, if you don't really need or feel like you don't want to be in a wheelchair, there is something else you can do, and it's something that is really easy. The tiny little folding seats that are either used for camping or some museums have them. You take that and you carry it with you, and you can open it up and sit down anywhere you want.
Yeah.
And it's not as obtrusive and it's not as big as a wheelchair.
Sure. And it might do the job for you. So,
if you just need to take a load off your back, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. But just be cognizant of the fact that some museums in Paris, like the Carnavalet, for instance, we were just there.
Yep.
At one point, I actually counted the steps. There was 44 steps to go up to the next level because these old maison de maître, or whatever you want to call them, the ceilings are really high, much higher than in a home.
Yeah.
So you have lots of lots of steps between the floors.
So when you were, I went back downstairs before you and Patricia did, and I was just standing by the lockers, and there was a woman, actually, I think it was an American, I'm not sure, but she was very upset because she could not find the elevator. And I think that one of the problems in some of the museums, now this is a museum that just reopened after being closed for 4 years and is trying to renovate and modernize a 17th century building. But obviously, they didn't make the signs clear enough where the elevator was, and she clearly needed the elevator, and I could tell she was getting very distraught about it, So, I mean, a part of the problem is signalization and having people who understand what you need in a museum.
Right, but there are a lot of French people who think you shouldn't make it too easy for everybody to use the elevator, because it will break it down faster.
What's the point of having it?
I know, but that's what they're thinking is...
Well, don't sit in the chair. It'll get used up.
Right. I know. But you know French people, right?
Yeah.
Some people think like that.
Yeah. Well, the woman behind the guichet, I mean, it was weird, the conversation. It was almost like, do I really not want to tell her where the elevator is? I mean, it was very upsetting to me. So.
Yeah. It's a little bit strange. So, yeah. Shoes. People get obsessed about what shoes to wear in Paris, which is stupid, because in Paris you will see all sorts of shoes.
And everybody wears comfortable shoes now.
Yes. But people will never believe us. There are people who haven't set foot in Paris in 40 years who will still go on forums and say that you should not wear sneakers in Paris. Voila. Okay. To that, I say, you're an idiot.
I mean...
And you can wear whatever's comfortable. But sometimes when it gets hot, like this last time, I have very comfortable closed shoes with socks,
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, oh, shoot, do I have sandals that are that comfortable to walk in all day? And in the end, I just wore my Merrill walking shoes.
See, and I was perfectly fine except for the pebbles in my sandals.
Yeah.
And the secret is wearing socks with them, even though that's very uncool.
Right. Who cares? Like, it's your feet. Take care of your feet. You don't have to worry about what other people are wearing because nobody's looking.
I honestly, because you had said that to me while we were on the metro, I was watching people's feet. I was looking down at the people's feet.
Right.
3/4 of the people, men and women, wear sneakers and shoes like that. That's what people wear.
I took pictures, right? I was taking pictures of feet in the metro in Paris, and it's mostly sneakers
and comfortable sandals in the summer, and there you are.
Don't leave the shoes decision to the last minute.
Absolutely.
Bring comfortable shoes
that are broken in.
That's very important. One thing that people don't think about, but they should, is that wherever they leave a spot, like they're leaving the restaurant or the place where they had a coffee, look around carefully every time. Look under the chair, look around the table to make sure you're not leaving anything behind.
Right.
Because it's happened to me so many times. So now I've trained myself to just do a visual check. Did I leave anything? Because you can be 200 meters away and then you realize, oh, I forgot my jacket. And you have to walk back and blah, blah, blah. So
and
just train yourself to...
And sometimes it won't be there when you get back.
Sometimes. Yeah. So whenever you sit down anywhere, train yourself to do a visual check to make sure you don't leave anything behind. Another thing is, do not overplan. And people overplan in Paris something fierce. Now, I do Paris tours. I do itineraries with people, and they send me their first idea of all the things they would like to do when they're in Paris. And almost all of the time, I have to tell them, dial it back. You cannot possibly do all of this in 3 days. Okay? It's impossible. If you had a helicopter, maybe, but you don't have a helicopter, so let's be reasonable, okay?
Well, I think that, unless there are people who really think that going to a museum is going in and out and running to see two things and then leaving. I mean, that's, there are some people who deal that. But otherwise, if you really want to do a visit, even when I did visits with people who were coming to Paris that were there specifically to spend all their time going in and out of museums, you never, ever do more than 1 in the morning with a big, nice break and 1 in the afternoon. It's just too much.
Right.
And sometimes I think it's actually better if you have the time to do a museum and then something else.
Right.
Don't do 2 museums in the same day.
Yeah.
You can do other things.
Right. There's much more that you can do. You could go visit a park. You could go visit some churches.
Right.
You could go take a cooking class.
Exactly.
Whatever,
Vary it a little because it's really hard and it's tiring
A
if
concert.
you're just standing up on your feet.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems with the museums, and this is true no matter whether they're new and modern or not, and I can vouch for this from last week, is that they don't always have places to sit all in every room.
Right.
And it is very tiring to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if it's because of COVID, but a lot of museums had a sign that says, don't sit here.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like it's a bench. Why can't I sit here?
Right.
Like it's a bench. It might be because of COVID. It might be because they're just idiots. I don't know. But
I don't know, but it is a fact that even I was just at the Centre Pompidou, which unfortunately was going to close at the end of this year for a couple of years, but there were some rooms that had benches. Now, I know I'm used to the fact that you won't find necessarily a bench in every room in an exhibit, but when you go through an entire museum and there isn't any place to sit, that's outrageous.
Right. And if you have a hard time going through more than, standing for more than 10 minutes, then get a wheelchair.
Or one of these folding seats,
Or one of these folding
I know for a fact that there are at least 3 or 4 museums that do have them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, now let's talk about something that, it doesn't, this is not something I usually recommend, but let's talk about hop-on, hop-off buses.
Yes.
Are they a good choice? I would say, generally speaking, those are overpriced because you're going to pay 25 to 30 euros per day that you use them.
Aren't there some that are 48-hour buses like that?
There might be some. I never use them. Okay?
I've done that a couple of times.
But it's worth doing if you're not spending a lot of time in a town and you just don't want to learn about the metro system or whatever. It's, it's worth doing. And also, Scott T., who is a member of the Facebook group, he wrote, "We took an aunt who never walked further than from car parking lot to store. We would head out, and within 10 minutes, she'd declare she needed to use a bathroom. 10 minutes later, she'd say, let's stop for a drink. After the drink, now a bathroom break again. By the end of the afternoon, we were able to cover a whole 6 blocks. Patience. The hop-on, hop-off buses were a godsend."
Now, I would like to second that because in fact, with my dear departed mom, the last time she came and spent a few days in Paris with me, we did a hop-on, hop-off. Hop-on, hop-off. And it was wonderful because it made several stops that she really wanted to see. We could stay for the time it took and wait for the next bus. And she thought that was delightful.
Right.
So if you are traveling with someone who has not the time, the patience, or the physical energy, it is really a good thing to do. And if you want to have an overview of the major sites, it's fine. You can you can do it in 2 hours. You can do it in a whole day.
Right.
You can actually get off, do a visit inside a museum, get back on it again.
Right.
So I agree with him.
In Paris, there's also the hop-on, hop-off boat.
Yes.
Les bateaux bus.
Bateau bus.
Bateau bus.
Yeah.
This is one where it's mostly designed for people who want to cross the city easily. It's not for tourists, typically. Also, because it's been recommended so much on tourist blogs, people think it's for tourists, but it's not. I mean, they finish service at 7 p.m.
And don't they only do 2 or 3 stops?
Yeah, I think there's 5 stops.
5 stops.
Along the river.
Along the river.
It's very limited, but it's fine. I think it's expensive, and I think it's a problem that they close at 7. Like, typically most people, when they're visiting a city, they're not back at the hotel by 7. Okay,
no.
So that's what I think. But consider that now we have Uber. You know, if there's 2 or 3 of you, if there was Scotty, the aunt, maybe Scotty's spouse, 3 people, if you buy the hop on hop off tickets for all 3 of you, it's probably going to be 100 euros or something. Well, you can do a lot in Paris on Uber with 100 euros.
I think the only difference is that the hop on, hop off is actually really, if you go to the top where you can look out, you know, there's the open space up on the top. It's really a nice way to see certain elements in the city. You know, I mean, it's more of a tourist trip, the bus itself.
Right.
Whereas the Uber is just getting you from one place to the other.
Sure. And also some hop on, hop off buses have narration of some sort. Okay.
Right.
So that's also good. If you know, because if you don't know the city, you're looking at stuff, you don't know what you're looking at.
Exactly.
Honestly. I mean, I've been in cities like that where it was good that the hop on, hop off bus told me. It's good. Yeah. Just one little thing about the price of Uber. This trip, when I arrived at Montparnasse and I took a taxi to Patricia's house. That ride was about 15 euros. On the way back, I called an Uber. And the reason why my Uber app was not up to date, because I hadn't used it for the whole pandemic. And so in the meantime, my credit card had expired. So I didn't want to mess with all that. So I just took a taxi. The taxi was twice as expensive as the Uber. And that's often the case, okay? Unless you happen to need a ride at a time when it's really popular and everybody wants a ride. But most of the time, Uber is half as much as a taxi, okay? So that's something to consider. You should look for parks and gardens to visit in every neighborhood. You know, if you spend a day in Le Marais, there's a bunch of these little parks.
There's little parks. There are little squares. They always have benches.
Right. And very often they have locals with their dogs.
Yep.
Which is cute. Or with their kids, you know, which is also very cute. So just look for those parks. You can always sit down. It's a public space. If you're with kids, they will like the fact that there's free Wi-Fi typically in those parks.
And for little kids, they often have a little like sandbox play area. I mean, there are many, many, many little pocket parks in Paris that most people don't realize exist.
Well, they walk right by them and they don't stop.
And squares. I mean, you have 2. Right. You have the little pocket parks and you have squares.
Right.
And they are pretty much everywhere.
And if you're with a person with limited mobility, just be nice to them and say, oh, why don't we sit in the park for a minute?
And usually there are some trees, so you get some shade.
Right, there's some shade and whatever. So that's good. And
churches.
And churches are also good to sit in, yes.
And generally are open. And if it's very hot out, it's very cool inside.
Right. And it's very pleasant to sit in a church and look around.
Yep.
And if you're with me, I'll be walking all around looking at the art in the church and
taking pictures.
Take pictures, yeah. But if you need to sit down, it's a great thing to do in a church, you know. And remember, of course, this is the last point I'm going to make, but I think you might have some more, that you don't need to see everything, okay? Paris, I know we just had a pandemic and we're all dying to travel again.
Right.
But Paris can be very tiring. It can be really exhausting. And I think you need to think about your enjoyment of the moment. And if you're not spending every minute of the day thinking, oh, my back hurts, or, you know, I'm so tired or whatever, then it will be a better experience for you. You can always go back.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Let me just add, I don't have that much more to add, but I was just thinking, you know, everyone gets tired walking around all day, and everyone gets tired from visiting. It's kind of a lot to put your body through and your mind in a new place. Cities are tiring. I was just thinking about Rome compared to Paris. Oh my God. I mean, Rome is even more tiring, and there are probably fewer places for you to sit down if you have to. One of the things to think about in planning your days, assuming you have several days at least, is that almost every museum has a late night, and you can take a break in the late afternoon. You can even go back to your Airbnb or to your hotel room and stretch out for a little while, because it's really good to take advantage of all of these late night openings.
Yeah.
And they're staggered through the week, so they're not all the same night. Mm-hmm. And it's a very good way of managing a day and not having to feel like you're going to collapse before you get back to your room.
Right. One more thing that I would like to add is about the museum pass. The two of us have used the museum pass before. We've recommended it.
Yes.
Now, there's two types. There's the Paris pass, which is a ripoff, and there's the museum pass, which is a very good thing to have. But right now, because all museums in Paris required a timed entry, I'm not sure how this works in conjunction with the museum pass. The advantage of the museum pass was always that you had your card in your pocket, and you could just show up, show them the pass, and they let you in. You know,
That's a good question. Yeah.
Right. Last time I checked their website, the official website for the museum pass, they hadn't talked about this. They didn't have anything mentioning this. But today, we are recording this in the middle of June 2021. You need a timed entry reservation for just about everything in Paris. Okay? So, is the museum pass still a good idea? For now, I would hold off until this all gets sorted out. I would just go to the official website of all these venues and purchase a ticket for the time that you think you're going to go. Most venues are pretty lenient as to the time. You know, you get a ticket for 10 a.m.
They give you a half hour.
Right. You show up at 10:20. It's not a big deal. Some places will be more lenient than that. Right. Most won't.
Most won't.
So just know that you have to be there within the half hour.
I was wondering, now that you mention it, because if you have a free entry and you still have to reserve, which is, of course, what I did for two things this past week, it would be interesting to go online and see if the free entry includes museum pass.
Right.
In which case, it would be possible to reserve a time and still use your museum pass.
Right.
Because in the end, if you do more than a couple of museums, it certainly is worth it.
Yes. Usually it is worth it. I just don't know how it's going to work out right now.
It would be interesting to go online and check. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So finally, I have only one other thing to say, having had some experience of taking someone around who's had a little bit of trouble walking and gets tired. If worse comes to worse, if you're traveling with one person or even two people who really can't keep up, it's really okay for one person to go back to the room and another person to keep on walking and visiting. You know, not everybody has to do all of the stuff together.
Right. And we had I was leading a tour with a lady from Australia who had injured her foot right before the tour. She still came on the vacation, but on a couple of occasions, she just said, I'm just going to hop on a taxi and go back to the hotel.
Right.
And it was fine. It was much easier than her, you know, really trying to keep up with us and be in pain.
And being miserable.
Right. You know, just do what it takes to have a good time in Paris, even if this means not doing quite as much as you had hoped.
Exactly.
You know, I'm somebody who likes to be comfortable, okay? I like to have air conditioning when it's hot. I like a nice, comfortable bed. I'm not one that enjoys suffering.
I don't think too many people do. No, but
there are people who don't mind roughing it and will just go because they have goals of what they want to see.
Because they have goals and because they're worried that it's the only time that they'll be there and that they don't want to miss out on anything. But the truth is that if you push yourself too hard, by the end of the trip, you might not be enjoying anything at it anyway.
Right. And this is really important for people with children as well. And you know your kids, obviously. I know that kids are amazing at, they really enjoy visiting France. All the kids I've ever seen who came with families, and they enjoy it, but they get tired. They just get tired.
And grouchy.
Right. Just think, at home, they spend so much time playing games, video games, and sitting or lounging around. All of a sudden, you take them to Paris and it's on their feet all day. And, and you ask them to behave at restaurants and all of that stuff. So just be considerate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do when it's your own kids, because you're like, oh, you're lazy. I think we're too hard on our own kids. And now that my own kid is grown and, I don't have to worry about this and I can observe other parents, I'm like, just let it go. The kid's tired. The kid's grumpy.
And there are parks, and you have to, consider that there are things that will be much more fun for them than going in and out of museums.
Right. Because you can make museums fun, like when you do a treasure hunt in the Louvre or something like that.
Right.
Our kids love that.
They love that. Or La Villette, where there's a lot of interactive stuff.
Right. So, yes, but most museums are a bit dry for children.
No, they are.
And when we have young museum professionals who create displays that are made for kids, it's much easier, like the La Villette, the exhibit I saw on Napoleon. Almost everything they had a thing at eye level for kids. Mm-hmm. They had rewritten the explanations for that particular piece. And they had the kids had their own headphones with different narration for kids. Newer museums and temporary exhibits often do this.
Yes, they do.
But they don't all do it. And when they do, the kids are engaged. The kids they really enjoy that as much as the grown-ups do. So but be nice, just accommodate. And, if... Unfortunately, both of my parents have passed away, so have yours. But I remember towards the end of my parents' life, there was a lot I wanted to do with them, but you just have to not push them.
That's right.
Too much. You just have to be really considerate, and if they're willing to get on an airplane to come all the way to France, which is already a huge deal. That's a huge deal. Let them just relax as much as they feel like they need to, and don't get frustrated with them if they don't want to go out to see whatever it is that you wanted to see. You can go out and see it and meet them 3 hours later, and they'll be happier for it.
Absolutely.
That's it for our strategies for older visitors in Paris. Or anybody with children.
That's our wisdom for the day.
Yeah, it's, I hope I didn't forget anything. Did I forget anything?
I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah. People will say, you didn't talk about this.
That's true. There's probably other things, that we could have mentioned. And also visit the official websites for all of these places you want to visit, because they will tell you about accessibility. And there's often a section of the website that will spell these things out for you. So if you take the time to check. But of course, that implies that you're just not packing a bag and leaving for Paris without a plan.
Exactly.
Which is, unfortunately, what a lot of people think they ought to do. Because they've heard it so much. In Paris, all you do is you walk. You walk.
Yeah, but people don't do that if they're going with people who are limited in their mobility.
Right.
They don't. They don't.
Right.
The only thing I can think of that we didn't talk about, but it's a little bit different, is going into restaurants. If you're with someone who has really trouble standing for a long time, don't try to go into little restaurants at times when everybody's eating. You
Yeah.
need to go to a big brasserie or a restaurant where either you know you can make a reservation ahead of time or you won't have to stand for a long time before you're seated.
Yeah. And also in Paris, sometimes, well, all over France, sometimes the bathrooms are in the basement.
Yes.
And
there's nothing you can do about it.
right.
The older restaurants are all like that.
I know when I take other people, I know where the bathroom is. But I don't think that's something you can know before you enter.
No, I mean, the old places, certainly in the heart of the city, are mostly like that, but some of them are a little bit more modern.
Yeah.
It
just depends.
Just depends.
Just depends. I think it would be perfectly okay if you're traveling with kids to ask before you sit down.
Yeah.
Où sont les toilettes? And if they point you downstairs, then go sit somewhere else, I guess.
I guess so.
Yeah. Merci, Elyse.
You're welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so, and you can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes, and there's also a link in the show notes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you for many years. You are amazing. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Heather Raymond, Dr. Carol Laventrosser, Dawn Fairchild, Lisa Maxwell, Renee Hettinger, and Daria. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. And thank you, Adam Gatewood, for upgrading to yearly. And since my itinerary service is about to start up again, let me read this review from Kia. She says, I've been a listener of the Join Us in France podcast for over 3 years. While planning a trip to France, I heard about Annie's itinerary review service. This type of service was new to me, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. From my initial inquiry through the entire process, Annie was very responsive. She communicated well, and her personalized and comprehensive travel guide was much more than I could have asked for. The value that she offers can't be beat. I'm very happy to have discovered the itinerary review when I did. It's exactly what I need to make my upcoming trip great. Thank you so much, Kia. It was a pleasure talking to you and spending some time thinking about the best things to plan for your family. My thanks also to Lynn Asbury for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says tip your guide. This week in French news. Lots has happened this week in terms of COVID-19 news in France. The number of newly infected people is going up everywhere in France, but in France, like in America, this is now a pandemic of the unvaccinated. 55% of French people have had 1 dose of the vaccine. 44% have had 2 doses. That still leaves a lot of people who are sitting duck for this virus and this new variant, and open incubators for making new variants, and we don't want that. So President Macron decided that one way to increase vaccination rates fast was to make it inconvenient for people who are unvaccinated to do certain things like eat out and go out to cultural and sporting events. The French economy cannot take more lockdowns, and that's what's at stake with this new easier to catch version of this virus. The French healthcare system commissioned an app called Tous Anti-Covid, and it has gone through many iterations and upgrades since they launched it a few months ago. Today, the app is totally plugged into the French healthcare system, so anyone who gets a COVID test or a COVID vaccine gets a certificate that magically appears on their phone, and it's in the form of a QR code. The app also generates QR certificates that are valid all over Europe. So you can get a paper certificate as well for those who don't use smartphones or visitors. That might be you. It's a great system and it's hard to game, so it'll keep cheaters away, which is good. Starting on August 1st, 2021, and probably for a temporary amount of time. I can't tell you how long it's going to last, but it's not forever, will have to show proof of vaccination or a negative recent PCR test before we can enter a museum, a restaurant, or a stadium. As soon as this was announced, two things happened. Number one, people who don't like Macron started to point out that this is going to be very hard to implement, that it's going to turn restaurateurs into health policy enforcers, that it's not fair, that it's going to limit our freedoms, yada, yada. Macron responded that vaccines are free and readily available in France, so it's only a hindrance to the freedoms of those people who choose not to get vaccinated. And if you choose not to get vaccinated, then you made a free choice, didn't you? You can freely choose not to be vaccinated, but you cannot choose the consequences of being unvaccinated. You know, in France, like anywhere else, there are consequences to bad choices. This is how it works the world over. I got my first shot in February. When I told my sister about it, she said she would only get vaccinated when it becomes either mandatory or too inconvenient not to be vaccinated. Like maybe if she needed it for work or something like that. She did not feel like she was at risk from this vaccine, and statistically she's right, but there are healthy people under 60 who died from this virus because genetics also play a role in how you fight off infection, and she has no idea how her body would react. At any rate, she did not see the need to get vaccinated. She wanted the powers that be to force her hand, and that's exactly what happened. So now, the second thing that happened when Macron made this announcement, the numbers of people making appointments for a first vaccine went through the roof. Macron was not even done with his speech announcing the need to have a pass sanitaire, so a health pass, when boom, hundreds of thousands of people were hitting the servers looking for a vaccine appointment. 3.4 million looked for an appointment while he was making his speech, and 1 million managed. So the other 2.4 had to keep trying. Within 2 days, they made 3 million appointments, and it's continued to go up and up and up. Of course, there were protests. This is France, after all. But when you have millions signing up for a vaccine versus 25,000 people going to a protest, well, you do the math, okay? I have a secret for you. Big secret. Macron knows that not every bar and restaurant will do an equally good job at checking vaccine status for every person that walks through the door. He knows this. The point was to make people understand that it's those who are unvaccinated that will be inconvenienced, and that those of us who have been vaccinated can do what we want. And it's working. Vaccination centers are full again in France. Almost 1 million new shots each day since the announcement. So it's working. What does this mean for you as a visitor? No matter where you're from, if you have what it takes to get you on the plane to France, you'll be good enough to get into that restaurant or the Louvre or whatever. And if you drove into France or took a train into France, it probably means that you are European, and we have those Europe-wide COVID QR codes that work everywhere, okay? So don't sweat the small stuff. If you could get into the country, you'll be getting into any venue that you want. And again, the point is not to put a cop behind every person. The point is to motivate those of us who were on the fence. And it's working, and that's what matters. For my personal update this week, I am at the beach and having a wonderful time. I hadn't come to Spain in 2 years, and the beach in Vilanova y la Geltrú, where I am, is just perfect. The weather is summer warm, but not too hot. The water is perfect, even for someone like me who does not like to get into the sea when the water is cold. There are some people on the beach, but mostly it's busy on the weekends. During the week, there's lots of space between groups, so it's very safe. It feels very safe. The restaurants are great. Most people wear masks when walking around, and and there are a lot of people around. We've had several outstanding meals on the terrace, but one inside because the terrace was too sunny and we didn't want to roast any more than we already had that day. Anyway, we're having a wonderful time. I'll go home late July, rested and roasted, because this is the most sun my body has seen in a long time. So let's hear it for beach vacations. You know me, I love to spend time in Paris, but beach time is so much fun. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/346, where you can see a recap of what we've discussed, and as well as links to good resources for planning your trip to Paris if you have mobility issues. If you enjoy the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and show them how to listen. And next week on the podcast, it'll be an episode with Elyse again about aise in Provence and why you should really huff and puff all the way up that beautiful hill. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.